And I looked at the little book out of the angels, and I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it. And it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach became bitter.
Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. I just wanted to share a few bits of information about the special music that we'll have this morning. These are very significant words that were spoken by William Miller. I fixed my mind on another time. And David Hunsinger, a composer of several gospel songs, became very interested in the Adventist history and has written several songs depicting very distinctive understandings that we have had passed on to us and that we maintain as well. And it is quite amazing that after the October 22, 1844, the very next day, October 23, William Miller had written a letter to someone who was inquiring about what had transpired. And these were his words. I have fixed my mind on another time, and here I mean to stand until God gives me more light. And that is today, today, and today, until he comes. And the meanings of these words are very significant because another time is not another date, but another moment that God chooses to come, that Jesus will be descending from the clouds. Also, the more light, obviously, that came with several who were studying day and night to even bring themselves to this point. And since then, of course, we received several understandings from the Bible after this disappointment. And then we have this statement, I will follow the narrow way. The narrow way was significant to the early Adventists because their focus was being prepared for Jesus' return. And I hope that that is still the same principle that applies to us as Seventh-day Adventists. We have a calling, and this is significant to us. And I hope that you enjoy this beautiful music.
I have fixed my mind on another time, on another time. And here I mean to stand until God gives me more light. And that is today, today, today until he comes. I have fixed my mind on another time, on another time. I have set my course on the narrow way, on the narrow way. For I know the time is close at hand, for which I watch and pray. And that is today, 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 until he comes. I have set my course on the narrow way, on the narrow way. Even so, Lord, come quickly. This is my fervent prayer. For I've caught a glimpse of glory, and I'm longing to be there. Let Christ be seen in glorious fire with all the saints of mass. We'll rise with those who sleep no more to meet him in the air. When shall the Son of Man appear? The Son of Man appear. Even so, Lord, come quickly. This is my fervent prayer. For I've caught a glimpse of glory, and I'm longing to be there. For I've caught a glimpse of glory, and I'm longing to be there. I have fixed my mind on another time, on another
Amen. Yes, what a beautiful song. The hope of centuries. Like in the Old Testament, the people were waiting for the Messiah to appear. And since he has gone to heaven, we wait for his second coming. What a day will that be? We've heard that this song was, or these lines were penned by William Miller, and he was the one who was the prominent figure in the beginning of the 19th century, when there was a worldwide awakening to the fact that the Lord is soon to come. And this is what we are actually going to look at. Last time we looked at the timeline of Christ, and now we will look at how the same seven thunders transpire in the story of the Great Second Advent Movement. I would like to recommend again to you Daniel and Revelation. If you Google this book, or you put in the title and then you put in PG Temple, then you can download Daniel and Revelation as a PDF. It gives you a short telegram style, so you can orient yourself very, very quickly. The seven thunders in the Great Second Advent Movement. So what I want to show to you here is that as I said, it was a worldwide movement. In the timeline of Christ, astonishingly, there were not only people waiting for the Messiah inside Judaism, but also outside. That would be a study on itself. I just want to point out the parallel. In the Great Second Advent Movement, it was a worldwide movement, and this is taken as a testimony from God that it is He who moves people. That is what creates a movement. It is not a man that conjures up an idea and that spreads through the world. So here in America, we had William Miller, and therefore it was called the Millerite movement. Correctly, we would say the Great Second Advent Movement. And then we had Dr. Joseph Wolff. He traveled extensively. He was a Jew that converted to Christianity. He traveled in Europe, Asia, Africa, and in the United States. He once spoke even before the Congress in the 1830s, I think. Robert Winter, with 700 ministers from the Church of England, proclaimed the message of the soon coming of Christ in England, in Lacunza. Lacunza promoted this idea in South America. In Germany, it was the pastor and theologian Bengel. In Switzerland, it was Gaussen, and it was very interesting. Gaussen was very diplomatic in introducing this truth, and he used the children. He taught the children at Sunday school about the second coming of Christ. The children told it at home, and a huge revival resulted. In Scandinavia, where preaching was only allowed by state-controlled, church-designed clergy, the message was not preached by them but by children, some 6 to 8 years old, that preached the message of a soon coming Christ. When you read the report, and you can do this in the corresponding documents, when the children spoke, it was evident that they were not speaking themselves. They were speaking like adults, and even the clergy of the time had to admit this. So the first thunder in the timeline of Christ was the wise men. And so what would the corresponding event be? The story of the wise men is the climax of the story of the Annunciation of John, the birth of John the Baptist. Then you've got the Annunciation of the birth of Christ. You've got the birth of John the Baptist, the birth of Christ, and then those three wise men from the east appear, and the story climaxes in a bloodbath. The children of Bethlehem, the little baby boys below 1 year of age, are killed. So we would look for a story that contains a bloodbath, and actually we find this in the time of the end, 1798. You will understand soon why this stands for the time of the end, because like in the time of Christ, on the left hand here, you have a bloodbath, and here at the time 1798, 1793 to 1797 was the time of the French Revolution, and there was carnage in France, and especially the clergy was killed, but then also the population turned on the population. Nobody was safe. And the rallying cry of the French Revolution was kill the wretch or crush the wretch, meaning Jesus Christ. So there was, like in the time of the wise men, there was an attempt to crush Christ. And later the head of state, after the French Revolution, you have Napoleon in power. He takes the head of the church, namely the Pope Pius IV, he takes him captive in 1798. And that is why this date is considered to be decisive. You will see more reasons why. And so likewise, in the time of Christ, Herod tried to capture the head of the church, which was Christ, to annihilate him, to kill him. So this is one theme. The next theme is prophecy. In Daniel 9, verse 25, we read, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which is 69 weeks. In prophetic language, a day is a year, 69 years are 483 years. Daniel has this vision in Daniel 9 in the first year of the Medo-Persian realm, that is in 538 BC, and he says, when Jerusalem shall be started to be rebuilt, or when the command goes forth, and that was in 457 BC. The 483 years or 69 weeks extend to the baptism of Christ. And it is interesting that 30 years before, when we have the birth of Christ in 4 BC, Zacharias and others start to pray for the grace to be amongst them that recognize where and when the Savior would be born. You know, from a Jewish point of view, that was the all-consuming hope. A Messiah would come to set his people free. And why 30 years? Because Christ was not only to be a king, but also a priest. And the priests were ordained to their offices at age 30, and they served till age 50. And so Zacharias and others, they prayed at that time, and light was given to them. And so prophecy was fulfilled to them in a very special way. They died soon thereafter, but they died knowing that the Messiah was already born. Now, the 1798 is also heavily connected to prophecy. And in fact, it is one, I think, it is the time period that is mentioned most often in the Bible in diverse ways. It is mentioned in the form of 1260 days. It is mentioned in the form of 42 months, or it is also mentioned in the form of 3.5 years, or in biblical language, time, times, and half a time. And if you take the key, 1 day is a year, then all these different time spans are 1260 years, which was the time span for the dominance of the papacy. In 538, the Bishop of Rome had taken pole position in Rome and was given the title by the Eastern emperor that resided in Constantinople, Justinian. He was to be the corrector of heretics. That is the starting point of the papacy. And prophecy said it would last 1260 years, and that is exactly the year when Napoleon sent one of his generals to Italy, there was political and there were other things happening in the background that made Napoleon take the Pope captive. So prophecy is another earmark of this time period. Then there's something that I would like to introduce to you that we will also use in the next presentation when we look at the seven thunders in our timeline. That is the north-south interaction. Let me just go to the next slide. Whenever an enemy came to the land of Israel, he had to come from the north. Whether he came from the east or the west, the approach was always from the north. And if he came from the south, that power was always Egypt. So whenever, and that is my point, when you have the time of a time period ending and a new time period beginning, then you have a north-south interaction. We will look at this, and here you have, I wrote this down here, from the north came Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and pagan Rome. From the south came Egypt. Now, Egypt was very interesting in that it stood out in history as the power that questioned the omnipotence of God. Pharaoh said, "Who is this Lord that I should obey to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." Of course he knew the Lord. He knew what he was talking about, but he denied it. And therefore, when we come to 1798, and the verse that we are looking at here is Daniel 11, verse 40, it says there, "At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him," that is the king of the north, "and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind," and so forth. So the south king pushes at the king of the north. That is what we're looking at here at this point. And the second thing you need to know is that in the Old Testament, things are happening on a literal basis. In the New Testament, on a figurative, on a spiritual basis. So what does Egypt stand for? It stands for atheism because it denies the existence of God. The king of the north is the papacy because Babylon is a form of is the spiritual form of the literal Babylonian Empire in the Old Testament. So local Babylon becomes a type for the global spiritual Babylon, which is the papacy. The second thunder that we look at is the baptism of Christ. And I would like to suggest to you, and I think I can prove it, that we are dealing in the Millerite history now with August 11, 1840. Why and how? The theme is, again, prophecy fulfilled. We see at the baptism of Christ, prophecy was fulfilled. 480 years led to the baptism of Christ in 27 BC. Likewise, August 11, 1840, a prophecy was fulfilled that is recorded in Revelation 9. And Revelation 9, please anchor this in your mind, talks about Islam. In Revelation 9, we have three trumpets, and actually in one of the songs that we sang, it said there the seventh trumpet is sounding, and that is correct. What you need to get is the first trumpet, the fifth trumpet is also the first woe. The sixth trumpet is the second woe, and the seventh trumpet is the third woe. The first trumpet is Mohammedanism from Mohammed onward till the Ottomans take control, and they become the ruling power, and they rule for about 150 years. Then the Ottomans rule alone from 1449 till this date here, 1840, which is a time span of 391 years and 15 days. So this is here what I've just tried to explain to you. The fifth trumpet is the first bow and so forth. It lasted from July 27, when the Ottomans made their first attack on the Western Roman Empire, till July 27, 1449. And there the fifth trumpet ends, the sixth begins. And the sixth was the heyday of Islam and papacy. That is something that I would like you to note. In the time of the Protestant Reformation, the Muslims were such a threat to Europe that Luther taught the people to pray, "Lord, protect us from the devil and the Turks." That is how they shook in their boots. Vienna was besieged, and they feared that when Vienna would be overrun, then the Islamic hordes would cross Europe, and the history would have been changed forever. The leader of the Ottoman armies was Suleiman. Suleiman was an incredible guy who never in his whole life lost a single battle. And he fought on various continents, and he was fully aware of what was going on in Germany regarding the Protestant Reformation. And he actually once proposed to Luther. He said, "Luther, come over to Constantinople. I'm making this up now. I'll give you a nice villa overlooking the Bosporus. You can look at the Hagia Sophia, and you will have no more pain with your Catholic opponents." And Luther said, "I'd rather be with known enemies than with unknown friends." And he stayed at home. So the next point I want to make is, you see, when the papacy comes up and has its heyday, there is Islam that is interfering with the papacy, so it cannot exert its power as it would like to. And the Catholics at the time, they said to Luther, "God has sent us this scourge because we were not radical and thorough enough by eradicating this terrible sect of Protestantism." And Luther replied, he said, "No, it's the blood on your hands that causes this scourge to come on us, because you've persecuted the saints." And he said, he quoted Revelation 9. Mark this in your mind, I say it again. Revelation 9 deals with Islam, the three woes, trumpets 5, 6, 7, and when the papacy is at its height, Islam will be at its maximum activity as well. And so when the papacy goes down, 1798, receives its deadly wound, the Pope is taken captive, there's no more need for Islam, and Islam ends. The Ottoman Empire ends in that it needs to be taken under the control of 4 European powers. One of them was Russia, the other was Germany, France, and England. And the Russian Tsar, he coined the term "the sick man at the Bosporus." That is how weak the Ottoman Empire had become from its heyday of glory in the Protestant Reformation. And an outlook is when the seventh trumpet, we are living in the time of the seventh trumpet, and there is always some unease and something ongoing with Islam. And when the papacy comes to its height in the future, in its end time phase, we can deduct from this prophecy that Islam will be interfering, so that 9/11 will look like Smarties. Now, you could ask me, how in the world can you say that there is Islam typified in the baptism of Christ? Yes, when we read Mark 1 verse 6, John was clothed with camel hair and with a girdle of skin about his loins. This describes him as Elijah. And he did eat locusts and wild honey. And we just read this morning the verse here in Revelation 10:10. The book in that John 8 was sweet as honey. There you've got the honey. And the locusts in the Old Testament was clean food for the people of Israel. So they were allowed to eat locusts. And the figurative level is that when you're allowed to eat locusts, it means you internalize the truth about Islam. Another example, I'm just pulling single examples here. In Judges 7:12, the story of Gideon, the children of the east lay along the valley like grasshoppers. By the way, these two words here, locust and grasshoppers, are translated from the same word. So this is the type, this is the literal, and the figurative you find in Revelation 9. When the fifth angel sounded, that is the first wave of Islam, they are compared to locusts. I hope you see that. Then there's another theme that connects the baptism of Christ with August 11, 1840. At the baptism of Christ, the Philadelphian door opens. What does it mean? It means that those who follow Christ from then on will eventually be led from the earthly to the heavenly sanctuary. In the time of the Millerite movement, the Philadelphian door that opens is the transition from the holy in the heavenly sanctuary to the most holy. So that is a connection there. The first temple cleansing, we are now at step 3, is in the timeline of Christ. At the baptism of Christ, the leadership is passed by. That means, it doesn't mean they're lost, it just means they do not see the light because of their pride and whatever has blinded them. The first cleansing of the temple is a second call to the leadership to follow Christ, but they deny this. And meanwhile, Christ has gathered a following, and this following is cleansed at the feeding of the 5,000. Excuse me, I wrote 500 here. And finally leads to the second temple cleansing when Christ is on the cross. All have forsaken him, and once the shock is absorbed, they slowly come together again. The first to recognize and to understand the light was Nicodemus. On the resurrection morning, you've got the women, and then the Apostle Peter and John, and then finally the 11 apostles that see the Lord. In the Millerite movement, March 19, 1844, the 2,300 years ended. The 2,300 years you find in Daniel 8. Daniel has the vision of Daniel 8 in the year 550 before Christ. So that is just about 12 years before the fall of Babylon. And he is told there that the sanctuary will be cleansed again, and that language refers to the Day of Atonement. And Daniel absolutely does not understand this. He says, but how can this be? And it were not the literal days, because 2,300 days, he lived through them and nothing special happened. He went about his business, and so he must have understood that this means something far in the future. And then in Daniel 9, the following chapter, he is given the explanation for the beginning of the 2,300 days, when Jerusalem should be built again until the end. That would be 2,300 days. And when these ended and nothing happened here in the Millerite movement, they sustained a bitter disappointment. Now, and now this is very interesting. This belongs to Adventist DNA. They calculated those years initially by the rabbinical calendar. Why was a rabbinical calendar necessary? When Jerusalem was destroyed, eventually the Jews got so fed up with the Romans, with the Israelites, the Jews, it was the most obnoxious province that they ever had to deal with. And in 135 AD, the Romans decided to get rid of all Jews out of Palestine. Can you imagine that? That would mean like something: all Americans need to leave America because we've had enough. So now they didn't have the possibility anymore, besides the fact that the temple was destroyed, to know when Passover would take place. Because Passover, according to biblical understanding, was linked to the barley harvest. You could only celebrate Passover when the barley harvest was ripe. So somehow the high priest had to communicate with the farmer and ask him, is the barley harvest ripe? When the first sickle of the new moon had been seen, that meant a new moon started. And when the farmer said, okay, high priest, the barley harvest is ripe, then the high priest, and it's interesting, I read this, I never knew this, the new month or the new moon could only begin if at least 2 witnesses had seen the sliver of the moon. 2 witnesses, I like that. It wasn't dependent on one. So the timing was done in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the center of timing. Today we have the center of timing is in Rome. Our whole calendaric system is Rome-centered with the feast days and the whole rest of it. But now the Jews, not being in Palestine anymore, they couldn't know anymore when the barley harvest was ripe. How do you do this? How do you define now the beginning of your religious year? And they came up with this rabbinical calendar. If you are interested, you can look it up online. Just type Google rabbinical calendar or ask AI, and it tell you how it works. It was an incredibly accurate system based on the moon months, and according to mathematical precision, they had it down to the accuracy of about half a second per month, which is incredible. The system was completed in the 4th century after Christ, so they had a system that was mathematically perfect, but it was not connected to the biblical injunction of the barley harvest anymore. And in Judaism, a sect had appeared in the 8th century, which they were called the Karaites. And the Karaites, they went back to the Bible and they said, we can only celebrate Passover when the barley is ready. And so they said, your calculation is mathematically correct, but biblically not acceptable. And you must understand, in the rabbinical calendar, the beginning of the new month is calculated by sun, and moon. It's a calculated mathematical point. In the biblical understanding that the Karaites had, it is related to the first sliver that is seen. That is the beginning of the new moon. So they were off by sometimes 14 days from each other. And when the 2,300 days ended according to the rabbinical calendar on March 19, and nothing happened, the Millerites, they said, could it be that we are off as far as the time is concerned? And they went to the Karaites and they found the solution there. And that was that according to the Karaites in 1844, and now this is important that you get this, when the sun set on April 18, 1844, that was the beginning of the first day of the new year. So technically in our language it would have been April 19. These truths were only slowly understood as the people grappled with these calendars, prophetic understanding, and the man who was foremost in this was Samuel Snow, who presented his findings at a conference in Boston on July 21, 1844. You will see why this date is important. We're now at the fourth point in the literal story. We've got the Mount of Transfiguration. It's the fourth thunder of the seven, and the fourth is in the midst. So you've got three thunders before, you've got the fourth in the midst, and you've got three thunders thereafter. And I would like to sensitize you to whenever you read in the middle or in the midst, very often it is related to this point in time, because Christ also said, where two or three are gathered, I am in the midst. So on the Mount of Transfiguration, you've got two, Moses and Elijah, and three, Peter, James, and John, and Christ in the midst. That is what you have on the Mount of Transfiguration. And here in the summer of 1844, you have also a play on two or three. There are two men that are instrumental in maturing this thought, and they have three reasons, and we will briefly look at the three reasons. I've explained the rabbinical calendar versus the Karaite calendar. The barley harvest had to be ripe, aviv, that is the Hebrew word aviv, or also pronounced abib. When you read in the Bible, the month Abib is the first. It just means the ripe barley harvest. You needed to have the ripe barley harvest for the presentation of the first fruits. And if you would like to know, when Christ died, on the morning of his resurrection, others rose with him. They were his first fruits, and presented themselves to many of the believers in Jerusalem to consolidate the truth of the resurrection of Christ. The second point that they came up with was that the period of the 2,300 evenings and mornings didn't begin at the beginning of the year, but in the autumn. So if a period begins in autumn, it will also end in autumn. So instead of looking at something right now, they said it is going to happen in autumn. And the third step that they came across in their understanding is that the Jewish cycle of feasts obviously had their dates, and they were fulfilled in these, or they were kept at these dates. So also in the antitype, Christ was crucified on Passover Day. The Spirit of God was poured out at Pentecost at the Feast of Harvests, 50 days after Pentecost, exactly according to biblical prescription, so to speak. And their conclusion was, then if this is true, then the Day of Atonement will be on the 10th day of the 7th month. So the question was, which is the first day of the first month of the year 1844, or the end of 2300? And according to Carrier reckoning, it was the 18th, 19th of April. Here I have a calendar of the year 1844, and what I want to show you is that from April 19 to October 22, you've got 887 days. And this is now, according to the Karaite calculation, and that is the calculation that the Millerites accepted, is the 10th day of the 7th month. And this is Adventist DNA. You must know this. What they also understood this to be is the Millerite night, where they fulfilled the experience of the 10 virgins. When they had this uncertainty at the first disappointment, they fell asleep, and at midnight, now watch this, at midnight, exactly on July 21, when Samuel Snow presents the 3 reasons why Christ is to be expected on the Day of Atonement, in their understanding, coming out of the sanctuary to the earth, that truth was formulated exactly 93 and a half days from April 19, and again 93.5 days from October 22. So at midnight, exactly in the middle, Samuel Snow presents his conclusions, and 25 days later, that is on day 119, Samuel Snow presents this truth at the Exeter camp meeting they have. The Millerites meet there. There were other camp meetings, but this was the main one in the eastern United States. And he presents it the first time, and then on day 120 he presents the understanding the second time. And the day 120, whenever you come across it in the Bible, you know it is a day that is, or the number is associated with the outpouring of God's Spirit. So the most well-known verse that we have about this, Acts 1:15. And in those days, Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples and said, the number of the names together were about 120. It's the time of the outpouring of God's Spirit. So, now we come to the glorification in the temple. That is where the Greeks ask Philip, and Philip goes to Andrew, and together they go to Jesus. Have you ever wondered why this was so complicated? First, Philip was known because he was slow of faith, and he didn't want to go to Jesus because these were Greeks, not Jews. So he goes to Andrew and he says, Andrew, if these guys here, they want to talk to Jesus. And then together they go, and they're probably not quite sure whether they should go or not go. And then you've got the story where Jesus is glorified. He manifests himself to the Greeks. Now, what Christ does there, he says, a kernel must first fall in the ground to die, that it may germinate and bring fruit. So he tells his disciples as well as the Greeks, I am going to die. I'm going to go into the grave. If I do not go into the grave, there's no fruit. Do the Greeks understand this? No. Do the disciples understand this? No. And this points to that dilemma where the word was there. In Christ's situation, it was his verbal word, but they didn't understand it. He who has ears, let him hear what the churches say. They didn't understand. And so likewise, the Millerites didn't understand that there had to be an experience that was to be compared to the grave, to the bitterness, because thereafter something was to happen, like the Greeks were just an earnest of the gospel that was to go to the world. And in Revelation 10, the angel tells John, he said to me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples, nation, tongues, and people. But the Millerites didn't understand this, and that's why, because they didn't understand. They didn't understand because they were so taken in by the traditions of their time that they couldn't think straight. And then the crucifixion is the sixth thunder. That is easy to identify. It is the great disappointment of October 22, 1844. They expected Christ to come out of the sanctuary to the earth, and he didn't appear. Their hopes were destroyed as if Christ had been a liar. And likewise, the Millerites were crushed to the ground. It was an incredible disappointment, a bitter cup. But mark it, this is the pattern of the three angels' messages. It is the pattern of the gospel when it goes into the world. And then you have the resurrection. One of the stories of the resurrection day is that in the evening of the first day, you've got two men. They're completely absorbed in their grief, and they're stunned by these events. They cry. And then Jesus joins them, the disciples on their way to Emmaus. And you've got a similar experience here in Advent history. It is the experience of Hiram Edson. Here you've got an artist's impression. It says here, suddenly there burst upon his, that is Hiram Edson's mind, the thought that there were two phases to Christ's ministry in the heaven of heavens, just as in the earthly sanctuary of old. In his own words, an overwhelming conviction came over him that instead of our high priest coming out of the most holy of the heavenly sanctuary to come to this earth on the 10th day of the 7th month at the end of the 2,300 days, he for the first time entered on that day the second apartment of that sanctuary, and that he had a work to perform in the most holy before coming to this earth. Do you see the solution there? On the morning thereafter, they had this experience, and when you read around the story there, these believers were shattered, and they went to the hay barn. Hiram Edson was the local leader of the Adventist, the Millerite movement, and with some friends, they knelt down and they prayed and didn't stop praying till they had the assurance that God would make plain what they couldn't understand. They walk out into the field. He walks out into the field, and you see the corn is not completely harvested. It is put together in shocks, and you've got the pumpkins lying around. And what I would like you to see here is that there's a second figure that accompanied him. Hiram Edson, when he had this revelation, he just stood there and tried to absorb this while his colleague Owen Crozier marched on, and then eventually Crozier notices that Hiram Edson is not with him and calls him, and Crozier later, together with Hiram Edson and Dr. Hahn, they dig into the study of the heavenly sanctuary, and they lay the foundation for the understanding as we have it today, that there's a heavenly high priestly ministry. I would like to close with a thought. The first angels, the thought that I would like to express is the following. God leads collectives, churches, groups, families, as he does individuals. He is the same to everyone. He doesn't do it once in one way or the next time in another. It is always consistent. It is his character. So when the first angel's message comes, fear God, give glory to him, and we are conquered by his love and repent, we start to love to keep his commandments, and part of that is the Sabbath. When then the second angel's message tells us Babylon is fallen and we leave behind all that is impure, immoral, unholy, everything that defiles our soul temple, because we are citizens not of Babylon, we are citizens of the heavenly Jerusalem. And at the end of the second angel's message, as we studied, there is this huge disappointment, and especially when you're a young believer and you're enthusiastic, you want to share, you run into a brick wall and you are disappointed. Situations arise in your life where you think you need to give up your faith, but you hang in there, and then the third angel's message brings the resolution. And you start to worship God by beholding him and become changed in his image and not the image of the beast, and you wear his seal on your brow, which is the Sabbath, and you drink the water of life and not the wine of Babylon. And then you have this hope, this blessed hope, that you will one day walk in the presence of the Holy God and his angels. Amen.